Welcome to the Monday, August 27th, 2002 meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Wiseman?
Here.
Commissioner Sahakian?
Here.
Commissioner Yakubian? Here. Commissioner Mangasarian? Chairperson Fuad?
Here. The flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which is one nation, under God, indivisible, justice for all. Can we have the posting of the agenda, please?
The agenda for the Monday, August 27, 2012 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Friday, August 24, 2012 before 5:30 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Next item, please.
Item 3 is approval of minutes. Item 3A, July 23, 2012 regular meeting.
Do we have any comments on the agenda?
No comments. Move the approval of the minutes.
Second.
Next item is oral communications. I don't have any cards, so we can move on to the next agenda item.
Item 5, action item. At item 5A is a report regarding ordinance amending Glendale Municipal Code Title 10.36 for preferential parking. At 5A1 is motion to recommend proposed ordinance to City Council.
Mr. Magnini.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, you have a report from staff on the ordinance amending Glendale Municipal Code Title 1036 for preferential parking. Specifically, that's dealing with the South Brand parking changes that we have brought to the City Council and the Transportation Commission. We've been working with the Planning Community Development on this project for a number of almost 2 years, and this was a result of the mobility plan, where we looked at the mobility plan, the parking requirements. Then South Brand became an issue in terms of its on-street parking. Commission handled one or two of the professional parking. That created some concerns with the auto dealers and the businesses in the area. So working with a consultant, we were able to come up with a district parking concept that Mike Nilsson, our mobility planner, is going to give you a presentation on the background of the South Brand parking. And then Tad Dombrowski, parking manager, will walk you through the changes that we're making, specifically relates to South Brand. We're not making these changes citywide. However, that our next step is going to be to do the same citywide. Ms. Sansoni, General Counsel for Public Works, has also worked in the specific of the ordinance. So if there's any language or the legal aspects of this ordinance that you have any questions, Ms. Sansoni is well versed in that, so she can answer those questions, and I'll be happy to answer you.
Before we get started, I wasn't clear. Is this a citywide ordinance, but then it has portions only to South Brand Boulevard?
It's specific to South Brand.
Only. This isn't a citywide change.
There are some changes might be in the citywide portion, just clarification. I'll let Chris answer that. But specifically, we're creating this basically district parking concept, and how that would be a little different than our preferential parking ordinance that we have in the city, whereas people apply for permit parking, go through the process, they sign a petition 75%, they come to the commission approves it. This will be a different setup, which both of them will present to the commission on what the process is going to be, what changes going to be in number of permits and the fees and et cetera, and how many you get. Those are the type of things that we're changing that is specific to South Brand. We hope that once that's implemented, it will kind of be a test case for us, and then we can apply that citywide. Because that's one of our purposes, is to streamline some of the processes that we have in the city, which is one of them is preferential parking, because it takes a lot of work and effort, not only by staff, but specifically by the residents who live on a multifamily residential streets and they have a parking problem, and then you have to go through collecting signatures, do a lot of work, and it costs them a lot of time and effort. It costs the city a lot of time and effort. So today we want to present it to you, receive your recommendation that will go to City Council, and then hopefully Council will approve it, and this will go into effect I would say it's somewhere about 60 days. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay. Good evening, members of the Transportation and Parking Commission. I will first go over the background of the South Brand preferential parking ordinance, which we are going to be presenting to you tonight. The purpose of tonight's meeting is for the members of the Transportation and Parking Commission to review the ordinance amending Title 1036 of the Glendale Municipal Code, which is where our preferential parking regulations are currently in. And with that, we'll receive your comments and then hopefully approve a motion recommending the proposed ordinance to City Council for adoption. Some background on how we came up with the South Brand ordinance. The South Brand neighborhood itself is economically vibrant with a mix of uses, everything from dense multifamily housing to over 200 small businesses, including the Brand Boulevard of cars, which has been a vital economic engine for Glendale for over 85 years. And it also includes the largest auto concentration of auto dealerships in the region. There has been some increasing issues with parking in the area. So responding to those parking complaints, the TPC directed staff in February 2010 to prepare a comprehensive solution for the neighborhood. With that, we have prepared a draft ordinance that modifies preferential parking standards in the South Brand neighborhood to improve quality of life for the residents, as well as ensuring the success of nearby businesses and auto dealers. The study area from which you'll be reviewing the draft ordinance today pertains to the South Brand Boulevard, Greater South Brand Boulevard neighborhood, which is approximately bound by Colorado Street to the north, Glendale Avenue to the east, San Fernando Road to the south, and Central Avenue to the west. The timeline on how we came up with the draft ordinance that the commission members are seeing tonight, after commission members wanted staff to look at this area comprehensively, in summer of 2010, City Council agreed on that direction and approved staff to investigate comprehensive solutions for parking in South Brand. From there, staff collected parking surveys with employers and employees. We conducted inventory and occupancy counts, and also researched best practices in parking management with our consultant, Nelson Nygaard. From there, in fall of 2010, staff and Nelson Nygaard presented the results of this research and the surveys and presented that to the Transportation and Parking Commission. From there, over 11 months and 12 outreach meetings were conducted with local residents and businesses in a variety of venues, from Roosevelt Middle School to meeting directly with influential stakeholders and meeting directly with the auto dealers. From there, staff presented draft policy language and as well as the outcome of those community outreach meetings to the Transportation and Parking Commission. Once we received input on policy recommendations from the Transportation and Parking Commission, we presented draft policy language with the comments to Council. From there, Council gave us approval to start drafting an ordinance, and they also wanted us to look at issues in regards to pricing of parking, permit parking, and from there we sought legal counsel to make sure that the policies that we were proposing were in fact allowable, and from there we assessed the permit program in terms of cost of how much it actually takes to run our preferential permit parking program. And from there, this summer, we've prepared a draft of the revised Title 1036. And tonight, we are presenting the draft ordinance to the Transportation and Parking Commission. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dan Dombrowski, where he will talk about the concepts that are part of the draft preferential parking ordinance.
The overview of this
The South Brand area that's on the right-hand side of the slide, that is the only area we'll be dealing with tonight. The rest of the citywide preferential parking, as it's known and as you see it on a regular basis when we bring it to you, will all be staying with no changes to it. So the only changes that we'll be making are changes from that existing policy that will be applied to just this area. That said, the proposal in front of you is to create a standard regulation in all of these areas that would be 2 hours, 7 to 7, Monday through Saturday, except by permit. That would be the regulation when anybody wants to opt in. We would not be making any changes to all the streets in this area. We would be leaving it exactly as it is today. But when people call our office and say, I would like preferential parking on my street, the regulation that they will be given is the same regulation. That's done to make things consistent for the user as much as it is for enforcement for everyone. The inconsistent regulation where some streets are Monday through Friday, some are Monday through Saturday, some are 2 hours, some are 3 hour, is so confusing to the public. It's confusing to our staff when we're trying to answer the questions to the public. So if the one exception to that is Windsor Road. During our outreach efforts, we had a specific case inside this area that Windsor Road came before you, I believe, a couple years ago now, and were very vocal. It was a huge problem with one business that was close to them, and their changes were finally resolved, and they are very happy now. So that being said, they have asked, and the outreach was very clear that none of the changes in this area impact their street. The number of permits for each resident is currently there is no limit. You can buy as many permits as you have vehicles, and what we found, especially in this area, is that with a limited parking supply, that contributes, you have even residents that are contributing to other residents who can't park on the street. So excluding businesses entirely, you still have residences that are impacting other residents. In order to resolve that, we would propose limiting to 3 permits per household. So that, and what that would do is, obviously because of the limited number of on-street, with most residents down there, you will find no more than 3 spaces in front of any household. So obviously, if they're getting their 3 permits, they can possibly park it. If they're getting 4 or 5 or 6 permits, they'd be parking in front of somebody else's house and pushing the problem down the road. So the proposal would be to limit them to 3 vehicles tied to their household. On the guest permits, the existing permit that we have, the permit program we have in place for the rest of the program allows each resident 2 annual permits that they can essentially give to whichever guest is coming to visit them. What we found up in the college area, where we have that program in place now, is that there was some abuse taking place. There were students who were somehow able to get some of these passes, and tracking it down is very difficult. So for this specific area, to avoid some of the problems we've had with past abuse, we're proposing that 30 one-time daily permits be given to the residences that they can use for whichever date they have somebody come by. It would be almost like a coupon book that they could just pull out and write the date on it and stick it in the dash of the vehicle. And they've now used that one daily permit. They would get 30 of them for free. And then beyond that, there would be a $2 flat rate charge for any that they wanted to purchase. Again, going back to the rest of the city, there's no change to the existing. So this would only be for the South Brand area.
Well, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question, since you're on the topic? What prevents somebody to use that one daily permit 2 or 3 times?
There are challenges with implementing that, there's no question. It's the way we have worked through it so far is that the date is supposed to be written in pen. There have been other cities that have implemented similar programs, and there are some different things we can do with online permits and other programs, but for simplicity right now, we're looking at having people write in pen on that pass, and then they'd be sequentially numbered. We could put in
So if
something.
nothing is written on the permit, that's a ticket?
Correct. The permit is almost like a coupon book that just has a number of, here's what they all are. But if there was, that says this is good for one valid use in South Brand and has a place for the date to be written on it,
But if you don't write a date on it,
it's not a valid permit.
so you get a ticket.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving to the permit approval process. Currently, the 75% threshold that Jono had mentioned earlier is cumbersome for some of the residents, and it also, under the existing process, we verify that they have the signatures they need, and then we bring this before you. In this area, we've identified several streets that have the potential for this, and it would be burdensome to prepare a staff report each time and say, here's what it is, and bring you the same problem that really has the same solution every single time. So what we're proposing is that to lower the approval threshold from 75% down to 66%, and then if they meet that, we would still do the verification. We'd make sure the petition is exactly what it's supposed to be. We'd make sure that the demand is there and that there's a certain amount of unavailable space on the street. And then we would go ahead and put in the parking regulation and issue the permits and send out notifications to all the residents that says your petition has been granted, and we'll be installing 2-hour accept by permit signs in the coming weeks. That process, really all it means is that this one time that we're looking at this area, we're deciding that this is the best approach for any of the streets that would be impacted in the South Grand area, and that this will help resolve the problem so that we can expedite when the requests come in and they don't have to wait each time to be brought before the TPC. Termination, just one last thing on the permit approval process. Terminations would be handled very much in the same way. If the residents wished to opt out on an individual street, they would then be able to get an approval threshold of 66% and be able to opt out and have the restrictions removed. Non-resident permits. This is the only area in the city where we would be proposing to issue non-resident permits. Typically, the permits are residential. It's a residential parking program. However, in this area, what may happen is that we convert it based on demand to residential parking and then find that we're only using 20% of the parking during the day. That's obviously underutilized, and what we're asking for is the ability to issue permits once we've determined there's excess occupancy available to businesses in the area that are requesting them, for their employees, for their visitors, for whoever it is that's coming by. This is the only area in the city where we would be doing this, and it's based on the uniqueness of South Brand as a whole, where you have several businesses that are bordered on each of the side streets by residentials. So we would be making sure that we go out and do occupancy surveys and that they have available parking before we'd be issuing any permits to businesses. Lastly would be the fees. The fees for the permits, we have determined, must be based on cost recovery. We cannot charge fees simply for charging different fees. And as a result, in conferring with legal, we have to have one flat rate of permit that would be applicable to anyone, be it residents, be it businesses. Therefore, we've looked very closely at what our cost recovery would be for the actual overall program and spread the program that we have in existence today. And we've also looked at projecting it with these changes and what it would do to South Brand. And both ways it came out almost to the same amount. It was $25 per permit and change, $25.40 or something per permit when we did the projection. So the cost of the permit currently is $6. We would propose for the South Brand area raising that to $25 per permit, and again leaving the rest of the program alone for now and revisiting that at a point in the future. So in summary, before you are some of the changes. Again, there's a few minor things that you've seen before in the many times that this has come out in the outreach that we've done. Most of this has all been incorporated into the ordinance, but these really highlight what those changes are between how we do it today and what we'd be proposing for the South Brand area. The next steps, we'd be looking for any comments from you on the draft ordinance before we're taking it to fall sometime in the fall. And we'll be including any of those comments on the report once it goes to council.
Who would like to begin? I can start. Again, I'm concerned with the daily permit, the handwriting, the date. We need to do a better job. As far as your 66% approval flow chart, if you can bring that back, I think you are missing one step, and that is staff still needs to make verification. So from 66% approval, you can't just go straight to preferential permits approved. We still need to make staff, well, there's no analysis, just verification. Non-visitor parking, 30 visitor parking annually, is that annually? Or if they run out, they can come back and get additional visitor parking, the coupon book?
Correct. There would be no limit on those. The first 30 are proposed to be free.
Okay.
Keep in mind that with the 2-hour regulation, a lot of their guests won't need a permit at all.
Correct.
So anybody who's going to be staying less than 2 hours, and anybody who will be staying after 7 in the evening, or up until
Sundays.
7 in the morning, or on Sundays, would not need a permit at all. So we're anticipating that there would be a smaller amount of the daily permits, the daily guest permits, that would be used, because it's really only for people who are home during the days, Monday through Friday, and then Saturday is probably when we would get the most amount of usage. And it's only for people who are staying longer than the 2-hour period.
Correct. My concern is, and this came up before, where people are selling their preferential parking permits, and we need some type of mechanism to prevent that, obviously. I don't know how, but I know it's going to be an issue in the future. My other question would be, we're issuing 3 permits per household. Now, is that based on they need to the limit is 3. If they don't need 3, do we still give them 3? Or they need to show registration and they get it per vehicle?
They would need to show registration. They would get whatever number they're requesting, and the permits proposed would be $25 each. So ideally, if they only have 1 or 2 vehicles, that's all they're going to want to be paying for, and that's all they'd be issued.
Well, $25 is not going to, I don't think it's going to discourage them, from getting the additional permits. But what's going to happen if you have a 1-bedroom apartment and the owner has 1 vehicle, he could easily sell his 2 other permits.
The vehicles would need to be registered to the address.
Okay, thank you, good job.
Next.
Okay, yeah, to kind of carry on in that theme a little bit in terms of enforcement, if somebody has 3 vehicles and they have 3 registrations and they decide they want to get 3 permits, is the correspondence between serial number on permit and license plate on the car recorded somewhere so they can't, mix and match? A specific permit has to go with a specific car?
Yeah, currently under the program, the permit itself has the license plate number on it.
Okay.
So the enforcement officers can tell if it's been moved to a different car.
Good, that's an easy way of doing it. Okay, next question has to do with the 66% requirement to get permit parking. If, for example, some street is not able to get the 66%, or I guess a similar situation would be if they had it and 75% or more decided they wanted to opt out, then the parking restrictions just go back to the default of 2 hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., Monday through Saturday?
On the residential streets, they would default back to the regulation that was in place before. So in some cases, there is no regulation on some of the streets. Some of them are 2 hours and no permits allowed. So it would default to whatever was in place before.
Okay, and my final question has to do with the non-resident permits. First of all, are you planning on charging the same for those, $25?
Correct.
Okay, and last part of that was, I think I saw in the definition that the non-resident permits would only be available to directly adjacent businesses. How would you define directly adjacent?
That is correct. We, in looking at the businesses that are adjacent, obviously if there was somebody, Mike, can you pull back the zone chart? All the way back to the beginning. There we go. That would work. Obviously, when you look at the zones, the way they're set up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we would try and keep people in the same zone that they would be. But the adjacent businesses, what we may wind up with is a situation down the road, and this may be 2, 3, 4 years, once several of these areas have been converted from their existing, the residents have opted in because of a parking issue, and we've put it in. Then you'll wind up having more and more areas available, so that if businesses that were, say, along Brand or Central, if there was one street that was impacted, we may actually be able to offer them to go down further to a street, and they could get a permit that would push them into where it's less occupied and underutilized.
So in some sense, then, directly adjacent is subject to staff interpretation?
The directly adjacent for now would be only the businesses that would be on that block or near there.
Okay.
But going forward, yes, we would want the flexibility to move them into an area that's underutilized.
Okay. And I actually just thought of one more thing while we were talking. I seem to recall seeing in the staff report that you did mention Windsor Road as one of the specific exceptions, and I guess you've done some outreach with those folks, and they've decided they want to keep what they have right now. In terms of other streets within the special preferential parking district that may also have existing preferential parking, assuming that this does go through and the ordinance is changed, it says in there that the Director of Public Works will have some discretion as to whether or not those would need to be adjusted or terminated or whatever. And I was just wondering if there would be any, due process involved for the streets in question if that kind of thing was going to happen.
That's a great question, and one of the things I did miss out, and we'll go back to it now, is that for the existing zones, for the existing preferential parking that is in this area, we're proposing that we leave it the way it exists today.
Right.
However, going forward, we do want to incorporate it so that we can have the consistent regulations. What we don't want to do is do a blanket that blankets the whole area and changes everything without looking at those individual areas.
Sure.
Some of those individual areas are currently Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So obviously, the new regulation of Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is not going to impact them negatively. And we would do it at the next time we had our sign replacement program where we were already going to change the signs out. We would do it whenever it was convenient and at the lowest cost. So we would implement those over time and try and get the regulations consistent. But I don't want to say that as soon as we're done putting this in place that we'll be going out there taking down old signs and not telling anybody about it. We'll be letting them know and sending letters out that says that this will be an improvement for you.
Okay, thanks. That's it.
I'm going to echo what fellow Commissioner Sahakian was mentioning. I do have a lot of concern about the taking advantage of that ticket method that you have for the permit. My question is actually more of a clarification, just so I'm clear. Assuming it gets developed the way you have it here in this plan. Would someone technically who's living in section District 5 or Zone 5, who wants to go visit a relative in 7, be able to do that? Or would their preferential parking have something on it that says Zone 5, therefore if he's parking in 7, would then be ticketed if he's in the wrong time?
The way it is set up now, yes. Your permit would be valid in the zone that you live in.
Okay, so my concern is this. In this particular area, I feel from my experience, people tend to, especially in these multi-unit dwellings, have family close by. And they tend to live in areas where they can depend, because of, transportation difficulties, et cetera, tend to be near other relatives who can assist and help out. So my concern, I guess, is I can think of many situations off the top of my head now where someone living in 5 coming to visit 7 for more than 2 hours at a time that's going to have problems with that. I don't know if there's a way to, is that an issue that came up with you, or was it something that wasn't a concern? Or I just hate to see, I think these 30 guest tickets for families who enjoy having relatives over, spending time together, I think that's going to go very quickly. And then I think the $2 charge is going to be difficult. So I'm just trying to imagine the situation, which I think exists out there currently, where that may be happening.
It was not overlooked.
Okay.
I don't want you to think it was. The proposal, very similar to the cap that we had put in place where you get 3 vehicles and no more. There was a lot of concern from residents when we did our outreach meetings about, well, I have 4 vehicles, I have 5 vehicles. And the idea behind that is really to encourage them to utilize the on-site spaces they have before utilizing the on-street spaces. And the only way to do that is to say that you're only going to get enough on-street spaces to where you aren't impacting your neighbors. And I think we have the same thing with a lot of guest visitation in that area. We had a lot of people, residents, who were complaining because my neighbor has so many guests over, I never can park in front of my house. And that was part of the problem. So again, trying to encourage people to utilize on-street parking if they have it and push that as much as possible, or using a relatively small charge at $2 a day for more of a discouragement to try and get them to use that parking on site as possible.
Okay.
I have a number of questions. First of all, what is the significance of the zones? I mean, are districts only going to be formed for an entire zone? What if an individual street wants parking within a zone, but not the other streets?
Okay, the zones, all we've done here to show you as an example is what's being created for the South Brand Special Preferential Parking District. It's all 8 zones, as we would refer to them, that are being created. It's based on the borders. And the Special Preferential Parking District itself will be created for that entire area. Individual streets still get to opt in or opt out based on their request. So the only reason we had clearly defined zones, this is very similar to the college, where there's 4 different zones, and it has to do with the proximity of, in the college case, where you live. The college is the central, and as you get further out, the zone numbers change. It has to do with people that were, for instance, somebody that lived in one of the lower zones, 5, 6, 7, or 8, that were more southern and worked at Americana. We don't want them parking up in Zone 1 with their permit. So there was some that has to do with differentiating where they are inside the greater district.
Well, are the zone numbers then just to locate where businesses, employees might park? Because I don't see how it affects, if you had no zone numbers and you're doing it on a street-by-street basis, I still don't know what the zones add to that. Or is it that the zones are for businesses?
No, the other piece that the zones add to it is that you can now share preferential parking within those residential streets. So if you and I, for instance, both live on 2 streets in Zone 4, I would be able to park on your street, or you'd be able to park on my street within that same zone. So for the residences themselves, whereas on a citywide basis with the preferential parking for everywhere else in the city, you create one street of preferential parking and you are only allowed to park on that street. I have another street that's adjacent to it and I'm only allowed to park on this street. So there is no sharing between residents of different streets. This allows for that sharing to cross over.
So it is somewhat arbitrary because if I have a friend, if I live on the border of 5 and I have a friend in 3, I'm out of luck. But if my friend happens to live on the other side, he's still within 5.
Correct, and the borders were chosen very carefully because they're commercial borders. So that typically you would not, as a matter of fact, the north-south dividing line between 1, 3, 5, and 7 and 2, 4, 6, and 8 is Brand Boulevard. And typically you wouldn't be living on one side of Brand Boulevard and crossing over the street to the other side. And the same thing goes with all of the east-west streets that go down. They're all commercial streets where you would typically, it would mean that your residence is more than a block away from if you're parking in a different zone.
Now, does this only apply, does this apply to any, does this apply to Central Brand or Glendale, or they're not, they wouldn't be, they themselves wouldn't be part of any district?
They themselves wouldn't be part of a district.
And on east-west streets, or like Chevy Chase goes through there, would it be? There's three east-west streets. Would those be part of districts, or those also would be exempt?
It would only be residents that are on those streets that would be part of districts. If they're businesses, they wouldn't be at all.
Would the parking would you have the 2-hour parking limit on Chevy Chase? For instance, I mean,
and
see what I'm asking? Are the east-west streets? Can they be part of a parking district with preferential parking permits?
Only if they have residents on them.
And so if you have 2 residences, the entire street then can be a candidate?
Typically, we would limit it to the frontage that's in front of those 2 residences because the other frontage would all be commercial.
Well, if they're between Central and Glendale and north of San Fernando, they're part of it. If they're within the limits, doesn't matter east, west, north, south.
Correct.
They're within the zone, south of Colorado, right?
Yes.
But he's not saying that. He's saying on Chevy Chase, for example, because that's the only street I'm familiar with, if that be 1 or 2 houses there could only be preferential parking in front of those houses. The rest of Chevy Chase would be normal.
That's
Correct.
That's correct. In another good example of that situation is most of if you take Brand Boulevard North and South, all the east-west streets with the auto dealers, they have, I want to say, maybe 1/3 of the street is commercial. So the residential, the park district parking or the preferential parking will begin where the residential begins. We will leave alone those segments that are commercial or already on-street parking, could be an hour, half-hour, loading zone, drop-off areas, things like that. We will only begin the permit parking in the area that is strictly residential. So in case of Chevy Chase, if there's one block in, let's say, an apartment building along the frontage of that, we will issue, permits for that. Now, granted that there's not going to be enough spaces, so if you only have 6 spaces in front of those apartments and there's 20 units there, they already are fighting for the on-street parking space along with the businesses, but we will only restrict it to parking to those blocks that are fronting the residential.
Is that somewhere in the ordinance? I didn't recall seeing that.
The language in terms of where the preferential parking
Commercial, I mean, essentially you're saying there won't be preferential parking in front of businesses.
I want to,
Is
I
that in the
believe
ordinance?
it's in there.
Okay.
Because we did discuss it quite a bit, and the auto dealers had concerns about losing the frontage that is within the residential areas, like the first, 50, 100 feet or 80 feet, whatever it is, to the driveway, they already have on-street parking that is used for commercial purposes. So we agreed that we will begin further than that, and that's how the language should have been spelled out.
I believe it. Now, the ordinance also talks about something called a special preferential parking district that's only created by council. Is this one of those?
Yes.
So a special preferential district is really just sort of an enabling. It, by itself, it doesn't create any restrictive parking. Because then within that, you have the preferential parking district that, well, I guess we no longer create, but what staff would create.
That is correct. In these special preferential parking districts, it changes the process. Council's established that here are the regulations that would be created if you opt into these. So then it's still up to the residents to go through the same petition process they've always had, with a few minor tweaks. In this case, it would be 66% instead of 75. But once they go through that process, it would no longer need to come to you to decide what the regulation is, what the hours, what the days of the week, because we've looked at it as a global picture, taken it to council. They've said, yes, we agree that this is what those regulations should be, and then we would just be implementing that.
Now, districts will still be done on a block-by-block basis?
Yes.
Now, we've had discussions here in the past about one block may affect another block. That'll just be discretion of staff as to whether you want to involve another block?
Yes, obviously, when one, we know, especially in South Brand, based on our surveys, I think we had streets that were almost 90% occupied. We had streets that were 60% occupied. So chances are, if that 90% street applies for the permit, it's going to shift some of that parking to the next street. This district parking will allow us to accommodate that, so the next street, as soon as it's impacted, then we will extend that. Like Tad was saying, between, let's say, A Street and B Street, we will reciprocate, so we will allow them to park both streets. So at least you have to take advantage of the on-street parking that's available, because they're doing that anyway, right now.
Right, well, again, so if one block within District 5 wants parking, you're saying that'll be it for now, but you say you will extend it to other streets in Area 5?
Well, within let's say District 5, we get one street that comes in and we give them permanent
Right.
parking. With 2 months, 6 months later, the next street up says, oh, all of a sudden parking has been shifted. We want permanent parking, we will give them the same thing. But then, like Tad said, within the district, we will allow the residents to be able to park on both streets.
So
because
so every block will have to agree by 66%, every street will
Every
have to agree
street, right.
by 66%. Okay. Now, the ordinance also talked about health care permits, temporary health care permits. That wasn't mentioned here today. How do those fit into the guests and not?
In general, the healthcare permits was something that we did hear from the outreach that was done that we hadn't accounted for in our initial preferential parking, and to this day, it's sort of unclear. It's difficult to define. What we're basically saying going forward with this area, and I believe it, I have to double check, but I believe it expands to the entire as well, is that we would be able to have temporary guests so that it didn't have to be your vehicle registered to this address. That was what we were trying to exclude, is we basically say your vehicle has to be registered to your address so that we can count that as one of the 3 permits you would be given. And that does not allow any health care permits or anything for those types of situations would then fall to guest permits. And we wanted them to be able to say, yes, one of my permits, the permit I don't use anymore because I got rid of my car, needs to go to my guest worker. This was a mechanism for us to allow that.
So the health care, I mean, you had something called temporary health care and health care. Were those 2 different things? Those 2 different And are those then, those are 25, are those treated like residential permits? They're $25 each? And they only can be within the 3 limit residential permit limit?
Correct. They are treated as one of your vehicles and would be charged the $25. It's just we didn't have a mechanism to allow that, since we were saying your vehicle had to be registered.
So if one person, so if one household uses 3 of their permits, there's none left over for their health care.
Let me just clarify that, if I may, and that is the temporary health care guest is a guest parking permit.
So it's no different than a guest permit. It's part of the
Well, it is
coupon.
different in that they have to prove that they're health care workers, and we wanted to define that more clearly in the ordinance.
Well, how's that
because-
different than just a normal guest permit within the 30 coupon?
Because if there's as far as the 30 coupon, those are 2 separate types of guest permits. We allow the temporary health care over and above whatever guest permits they have. And this is so that they can get it's like a utility worker coming to the house. This is the normal business of a
Well,
residential
again, where
area.
does it fit? It's not a guest permit, but it's
It
not
is a guest permit. I would direct you to the ordinance on
What we need to do is
Subsection,
clarify, distinguish between the guest permit that lives. We have a person who takes care of an elderly person, and they come once a week or twice a week for whatever, health care that they provide. The question becomes, how do we count them as one of the, like Tad was mentioning, one of the three that is issued, so you can only get two, or they get their three, plus because of that situation with some doctor notice or something, that we give them one more that is called special health care permit of some sort.
And how's that different than a guest permit?
That's what we're trying to, I'm asking your question to clarify for us, because that's a very good question.
Because in a way, maybe you just need
Yeah.
a guest permit category and you're done.
Yeah, if they come twice a week, they use up two of those permits, and so a person could be financially disadvantaged maybe. So I just want to, that's the question we have on the table we need to do. If it's one of the three, or it's in addition to the three. That's what we want to address.
Just to make a comment on this, if this is something that, in the big picture, might eventually, if it works out, kind of take the mechanism for the entire city, this is kind of the test case here, at some point it would make more sense for those health workers that come to be issued a special permit that perhaps they pay for or their company pays for, that would then allow them to travel into these different preferential parking districts for their work, for their needs, as opposed to having the residents need to issue them whatever guest permit they would need. It seemed to be a little bit more efficient if they were given there might be some abuse to that, but if there's proper investigation initially when they're given that permit, that might solve a problem.
Well, it's not just health workers. It could be Glendale
Right.
Water. I mean, it could be anybody, right?
Exactly.
And so the concept of it maybe has to be fleshed out a bit.
Yes, I think, correct. We just need to staff, that's a very good question, to decide whether or not, for healthcare guests, do we give them one more additional permit based on certain justification that they're a healthcare professional, the way it is described here, that they're licensed practical nurses, registered nurses, home care aides, etc., which we know they exist and they provide services. And do we provide that particular residence one more special type of a guest permit that it's only issued for that type of a person with certain justification, or they have to use up one of the three, or use one of the regular guest permits on a daily basis that they arrive?
And which bucket does it fit in? Yeah.
If I may, the way it's written now, it's a special permit. It doesn't count toward the guest permit allowance, because it goes through a review.
Or the residential permit, either.
It's not a residential permit either. It's specified as a temporary healthcare guest parking permit. And this goes, it is vetted through the Director of Public Works Departments to ensure that this is a legitimate healthcare need. And yes, it is the resident that applies for it, but they have to...
And it's free.
I haven't seen the latest in the fee resolution, but so I don't know if there's
Why would it be free?
I don't know if it's free,
Yeah.
so that's something I would defer to staff on that issue. But it is intended, and the way it's written, it could be more clear, and we could certainly take that under advisement, that this is a special type of a permit that does not count toward the guest permit count, be it in the South Brand area or in the other preferential parking districts, so that it's addressing a particular need over and above what other guest permits they may be allowed to have.
Okay, now then going to the... Go ahead.
I'm sorry, may I just read this section? Maybe it's what Chris was mentioning. Temporary healthcare guest parking permits for all preferential parking districts. It shall have the sole, Public Works Director shall have the sole discretion to issue healthcare guest parking permits to residents in need of healthcare providers. A resident requesting such permit shall submit a verified statement under penalty of perjury to the Director indicating the medical necessity of such temporary permit and the approximate period of time for which the permit would be needed, Other supporting material may be requested to substantiate the need for said temporary health care guest permit. So what we're recommending, I think that's, if the commission agrees, is that they will get, let's say, a resident ask upon providing the, required documentation, that they get one of these permits, special permits for healthcare providers. And I even recall this discussions with at the commission meeting when we were first discussing it with you. And they'll get it. The question would becomes, we need your input as to whether or not that should be charged as the $25 fee, or that should be free, considering that it's for medical reasons. And then it will not be counting as part of the 3 residential permits.
Okay, and now going back to the permits that are available for employers, you said those would be issued after, I guess after a survey has been, after some determination is made that there is availability on the street? So does that mean you put in the preferential parking and you wait a period of, what's the sequence of that?
We can do it both. We were planning to do it both ways. Anytime we get a permit parking request, we go out there and have a look at the on-street parking. There are times that we find out that it is really not a problem, but there's 1 or 2 residents that really have serious problems. If you recall, I think yourself and Commissioner, I believe, was Weissman, that we met with residents and help me out on
4 over.
car park.
Oh, in car park, yeah.
Yeah, and off of San Fernando, there was one particular resident. We had only 2 or 3 residents who were really complaining and created a need for preferential parking. We met with them. We worked with the business there. We asked them, hey, just don't park here. Don't, allow enough parking spaces for residents, 1 per block. And ever since, things have worked out itself. So I think we will do a survey. We kind of look at the situation before going through the process, see what the on-street parking. If it's really bad, then by installing the permit parking, it should solve itself, get rid of the non-business, non-resident parking. But then we will evaluate it again and see, well, during the day, only 30% of the spaces are used. They have a permit. Why not allow the businesses to park there? So we'll start giving the non-businesses in the area the non-residential permit, a few at a time, and see, we will monitor it. Most of the time, residents will tell you, it's a bad situation, it's got worse or it got better. So we'll do that on an annual basis. Most of the time, it solves itself, and we know where the problem areas are, and you're able to work that out by the residents. So it's going to be a before issuance of the permits. We'll do an evaluation afterwards.
Okay, and again, so as you said when I first started speaking, if there's one street within, say, District 5, and you determine there's room for businesses, then they'll get a permit and they could park anywhere within District 5.
Zone 5.
Now, I know what I made, and maybe it doesn't need to be said in the ordinance, but or should it be said that just because you got a business got a permit this year, they're not entitled to one the following year because conditions change?
That's
so each
correct.
year there'll be a new evaluation.
Yes, so anticipation, you may get, like on that particular year, maybe people only got 2 permits, even each resident. And then all of a sudden the next year, people start buying the extra permit, they bought a new car, and that could exacerbate the on-street parking situation, then we will evaluate that. So it's going to be, it takes a little time, usually my experience with professional parking, to, kind of work itself out. But then, initially people park on the next street because they're upset. Oh, they put permit parking and I'm going to park on the next street. Over time, people go back to their normal habits of parking.
Now, if there's a shortage of, the assumption would be there will be a shortage of business spaces. So you'll have to pick between businesses? I mean, they'd be first come, first serve? Or how, if there's 2 businesses who want the single available spot, how do you determine that?
We discussed that with the auto dealers, and we said that it's going to be tough for us to just say we're going to give first come, first serve. We will offer it if you have to do a lottery, if you have like 5 permits to give up and 5 businesses want it, maybe they each get 1. But if it's more than that, we'll just do a lottery. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but I think that's how it will be divided.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is the reason why the ordinance leaves it to the discretion of the Director of Public Works, because this may have to be on a case-by-case basis. We expect it will. And there may be some policies that have to be put into place to make it fair and to make it workable. So that's why we have it at the discretion of the director to issue or possibly not issue any.
No, that, I have no problem with that personally. Now, I know, is everything done on a calendar year basis? The coupon books, the residential parking,
I'll let Ted answer that.
as opposed to, say, a 12-month rolling
Yes,
basis?
it is.
So does it, maybe it doesn't still cost the city the same, but if I apply it for something in September, it's only good for 3 months, $25 for 3 months, tough?
And we would be looking at prorating that either to a quarter or monthly, depending on what worked out best. For your first, especially for people who are just coming in, it's a
Right.
new person who's coming in and moved in September, then yeah, we'd be looking at prorating it through the end of the year, and then they would get a renewal in the mail.
And just, I get one final sort of a technical question. To get a guest permit, do you have to have a residential permit? Somebody doesn't have cars, but they have visitors.
I don't believe so. You could still get guest permits.
That's what it says. You don't need to own a car to get a guest permit.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yes.
We will definitely look into because you can print anything now these days with your own computer. So we'll make the permit such that it's got serial numbers, it will have a city logo, and all the things we can do to make sure that they cannot be duplicated and used. But sometimes it happens, unfortunately, but we will do our best to make sure that it's done. And we're looking at different types of permits, too, so we make it as fraud-proof as possible.
And the one final thing, you mentioned something called a special event guest parking permit. How's that different from a guest permit?
Okay, go ahead. Tyler.
One of the challenges we had, and I was going to go back to temporary health care for a second, just because this really does highlight exactly that question. One of the challenges we had was the preferential parking for everywhere else besides South Brand, you get 2 annual guest permits. In the past, those have traditionally been used for a healthcare worker. They've been used for a lot of different purposes. So some of these issues, as they came up and as we started hearing feedback, we wanted to incorporate a mechanism for South Brand when we don't have 2 annual guest permits anymore. So,
Because those had unlimited use for a year.
correct. And
Now they're only good for 1 day.
correct. And that's now the same thing regarding a special event permit for the rest of the city, and what we do consistently in all areas except for South Brand is if people request daily passes, if the 2 annual passes aren't good enough because they're going to have 3 people show up or 5 people or 20 people show up, we have them come in and we issue temporary daily passes that would work in their scenario. In the South Brand area, we had to look at how that was going to work, and because they're given daily passes to begin with, they can use them. That's the flexibility they get over the people with annual passes, is they can use 1 permit now, they can use 5 permits now, or they can use 10 permits now. So it allows them the flexibility where we don't really need to do the special event permits we've been doing in the other areas of the city for South Brand, because they really have the flexibility with the booklets of issuing it, whether it's a small event or a larger event.
So the special event guest parking doesn't pertain to South Brand?
Correct. Their guest parking is all daily permits for that use.
It's just a thought. I mean, you're the ordinance drafters, but maybe a little chart that sort of
Yes.
type eligibility term that might be helpful for people like me who can't understand all the fine print.
Chairman, it's just a policy question because we've debated a lot of these issues in terms of how it will work or won't work. In the South Brand, you could have a situation which I have an anniversary party and I need 20 guests, and now I have to use up all my $2 permits, and then I have another birthday party, I have 10 guests, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the rest of the city, now this doesn't happen very often, but we've issued 30, 40 permits if it's a special event parking. So the Commission's input will be valuable to us as to, in the South Brand area, the way it's structured right now in the ordinance is that you will use up the number of guest permits that you have. Let's say you had 20 guests and you use them up, and if you have more guests next event, then you have to go and purchase the $2 permits for your next event. Versus the rest of the city, which you will have a free special event parking that we issue, and, we do that. They call us 24 hours in advance, and we issue those permits, and we give them to the residents, and they use it up just for that one.
Well, I
So-
assume you went to the one-day permits because thinking is because there's less parking in South Brand than many parts of the city, this is a way to further constrain parking.
That's correct. So it's an issue that can come up where we will have some residential units that they don't want to. Okay, I'm going to spend all my daily permits for my event, and the answer could be, okay, you're going to have to be able to buy more. You need 10 more, you buy 10 more, or 15 or 20 more, versus the rest of the city, which we will be coming back to you to basically establish the same concept for the rest of the city in terms of district parking, maybe not the special, that smaller district, but larger districts in different parts of the city, like we have at the college, and apply the same requirements that are here. So it's something we're not recommending to change. We're saying you let the residents use their guest permits, but if there might be a possibility with some residents saying, no, that's a hardship, and we want to have a special, once a year maybe they get a special.
Keep in mind that in reality, people can start parking as early as 5 p.m. and they won't need any permits because after 7, you've run through the 2-hour and you're good for the rest of the night.
Right.
And Sundays are free, so it's not like an evening parties will be unaffected.
That's true. So those are, we debated all those issues. Just want to tell you that we did look at it, but it could come back and say during the week, sometimes people have events and visitors more than anybody is expecting, and that can come up, and the answer is they'll use up their guest permits.
Now, is every household automatically given a coupon book, or do they have to ask for them?
Well, I think we said that you don't have to buy the permits, 1, 2, or 3 permits. We will, if they want just the off-street parking, they just want to have the guest coupon book, we will sell it. We'll give it to them.
But do you hand them out like candy, or do they have to ask for it?
Typically, we have a letter that goes out that shows your renewal of what you got last year. So whenever we would have it implemented in the district, we would send letters out to everyone saying, if you would like to request this, please check this, return, go to the website, do whatever you would like. And if they request 30 permits, then annually, and that's all they got, they didn't get any permits for their vehicles because they park everything on site, then annually they would get a letter saying, would you like to renew or make any changes
So no
to the 30
response would
guest
mean they don't get any permits.
Correct.
And they can always borrow from the neighbors. That's sort of what I'm getting to. It's not as though if you know your neighbor, you can get them.
The only issue I want to raise, so we're talking about this, all the different scenarios, could be that if I don't buy the regular residential permits and I just buy 30 permits, it's $2 and I can sell them, give them to you, and you can use that, 30 days of the month to park there. So that's something we need to think about. I mean, if somebody just without buying the residential permit just gets the coupon book, and I can sell them at $3, at 10, you can buy 10 of them if you're a part-time employee, and you can park on that street. Something can happen. But we need to think about that option.
I guard against.
I don't have a...
Yeah, it seems to be some things that need to be fleshed out in all this. But coming back to that health thing, I think that those special permits put in the hands of the residents to come. I mean, someone who's just had a huge surgery, who is basically invalid in their house, needing somebody to come and assist with physical therapy. How are they going to manage to kind of follow up with the city, come to the city, get this permit, come to the clerk's? I mean, how are they going to make that happen? And then once that person comes, let's say the therapist A comes from this company, they've parked 3 blocks away, you give them the special permit, health permit for them to be there, but who's to say the next Wednesday it's not that same person because there was a scheduling problem? And that's how it happens. It's over a long course of time. I think that whole scenario the burden should be put on the businesses. I think healthcare businesses that are in the business of coming and treating people in those areas should have a higher fee. They should be carrying the burden of those permits, and I think they'll be less possibility of abuse, as opposed to a resident who fills out the form needing help, someone's coming to so-and-so, gets that and then hands it over to Uncle Joe, who, could, I don't know, there may be some ways of abuse in that scenario. I think it would be less likely if it's a burden is put on those businesses coming to work within Glendale in these preferential areas. I think, that's the city could perhaps get some more revenue, whatever it could be, by putting some more burden on them, I think.
I think that's a good point. We will definitely, maybe we'll have an online form that they will, print and fill out, send it to us with the signature from the resident that, this person is going to be under our care, and that can be used by the company.
Or it can be an alternative, one or the other. That way, if somebody's coming from Pomona and they had no idea what's going on here, they're not burdened. But as you say, if you're on your respirator, you don't want to be calling up City Hall.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We will. I think that's a very good comment. We need to make it practical for people to have that kind of a need. We'll address that. Again, as I said, we try to make this ordinance such that for these special cases, the Public Works Director has the discretion to, be able to address the need of the resident. We don't want to punish a resident for getting sick or they need medical care. We just want to make sure that they're, taken care of. And we've done that before, in the other areas of where we have a residence. It's not on the street that was preferential parking was implemented, but they're right on the corner. But they have a legitimate reason to park there. We have a lot of red curb on that street and things like that. So we've done use our discretion to address those things, and this could be definitely one of those situations. On a case-by-case basis, like Ms. Sansoni mentioned, we can address them.
Do we have any more comments? Do I hear a motion? Guess it's up to us to recommend or not.
I will move that the Transportation and Parking Commission recommend to the City Council that the ordinance amending Glendale Municipal Code Title 10.36 have our stamp of approval and be moved on to them for their consideration.
Have a second?
I have a question. The concerns that we had, enforcement and what have you, Ms. Sanson, do they need to be worked out into the ordinance, or those are details that can be fixed later?
Members of the Commission, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's a matter of enforcement?
Well, we brought up several issues. All the commissioners did. Some of them are very valid. As a matter of fact, Mr. Bagdanian brought up a couple of issues that are very important. And I'm wondering if this ordinance is approved and we need to add or make changes to it now, it needs to be amended again and it goes to go back to council?
At the point at which it's amended with your recommendations, then it goes to council. Council hasn't seen this ordinance yet.
If the commission desires, we can go back and look at these issues, because they're very, very good comments, extremely good comments. Some we debated and you don't have an answer for them, but there's a possibility of different answers. So if the commission desires, we can make those changes or address your specific comments, give you another draft before we take it to City Council. That's your
Or
option.
at least if you come back with at least, let's say, 2-3 solutions for each topic that we discussed, and we pick the best one. It's not going to be your perfect ordinance. In the future, I'm 100% it's going to change. At some point, we need to, make changes and improve it. But for now, I think we identified enough issues that we can do a better job in drafting a better ordinance and then going to council.
Then it goes to council.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, it's up to your discretion. We'll be happy to address those areas. I think some of your questions, we were just more of a clarification.
Yes.
We can clarify them further in the language of the ordinance. Some of them that we don't.
I think the main thing is probably the healthcare provider.
Well, actually, the healthcare provider, I feel comfortable with that because it is considered a special permit, and it goes to the administrator, Public Works, to make a decision. That's addressed, but as far as, it's easy to sell these permits, it's easy to duplicate them, you can put a date on it. Now, that's going to generate complaints, obviously, in the future, and it's going to come back to us, and we're going to have to deal with it. Am I correct?
Yes.
And then it could be a recommendation that's going to impact the ordinance, and we need to revise the ordinance at that point.
Well, I'm not sure, if we're talking about fraud, they're going to number the tickets, they're going to put license plates on them. I'm not sure, other than the police checking that stuff. If people are going to sell it, they're going to sell it, I guess.
Well,
But I'm not sure what you can do against, say, fingerprint them.
maybe the ordinance should have a penalty if you sell your ticket.
Well, I get you're asking a question, would it be illegal to sell them? I guess that's sort
Of course, those needs to be included in the ordinance. And again, the healthcare issue also, that needs to be addressed because the fees for the healthcare is not addressed. And also, if we're going to take the recommendation of Commissioner Yakubian, which is a really good one, and put the burden on the hospitals and the daycare providers to apply for the permit, I think that should be also in the ordinance.
Well, let me ask legal, do you have any views on whether we should or can make it illegal to sell them?
We certainly can. And one of the ways to do that is to put in the specifics, such as the date must be put on the temporary parking permits.
But if I sell my guest permit to my neighbor, should that be illegal?
All it needs to do is be in the ordinance so that when a citation is issued, the police officer has a code that shows that it's been violated. This is one way we can beef up this ordinance, and it's a great suggestion from the commission, and that is, anyone who's found selling permits, anyone who's not been legitimately issued, or if they have been legitimately issued to that person selling, we'd have to find a way that can be
Well, we need to give a
proven.
mechanism to enforce it.
It's a mechanism for enforcement, exactly.
Well, I'm all in favor of making fraudulent issues is all that illegal, but I'm not sure what's so bad about that. Somebody selling it to their neighbor.
Well, it's not bad for you if you don't live on that block, but if I'm your neighbor and you sell 20 of your tickets and I can't park there, it's an issue for me.
Okay, well then maybe you can sell it to your neighbor, but not to somebody across town.
Again,
Yeah.
it needs,
So I don't know, that
It needs to be
has so much
fleshed out.
complexity.
it
You
needs
can
to
sell
be
them half price.
Yes.
A violation of the municipal code is generally a misdemeanor,
Correct.
unless it's specified in the code that it is an infraction. And then if there's number of infractions, it turns into a misdemeanor. So
I would say a misdemeanor out of the box is pretty harsh. I don't know.
generally speaking, though, violations are misdemeanors. The vast majority are, and they can be
Well,
prosecuted
maybe you raise a
criminally.
point, maybe staff needs to think about what should be a misdemeanor, or what shouldn't be. Maybe your neighbor's okay, but crosstown isn't, or maybe they're both bad, I don't know.
Just as a quick point of reference, we did include some language in Section O that has to do with penalties and revocation of permits, so that if there is abuse, and this was existing language that already applied to our preferential permit program, we've applied it to the special district as well. So this is the standard language that says if you're caught abusing the program for any
Well, see,
number of reasons.
abusing is a broad term. I can see if you're not sick and you get a health permit, that's one thing. But if selling it to a neighbor, that's
Well, and it says in here, it is unlawful to sell, rent, lease, transfer, or duplicate any permits. So we have addressed some of the abuse
to
issues.
invite your neighbor to your party, and it makes it fine.
Yes. We're encouraging it.
So, Anna, do you think you need more time before we goes to council?
I think we can address them. It's just, this is not going to take too much time to bring it back to the commission for just have another look at it if you wish. It's not, Mike, help me out. I don't think we have a time critical situation right now, although we have one preferential parking has been waiting that this ordinance gets passed in the South Brand, but another month is not going to be a big hardship in terms of if you wish that we can clean up some of these and address some of those issues that the commission has raised and bring it back to the commission for approval. That's the option. One area that if I can address staff, is the issue of whether or not if a resident does not buy a residential permit and they just get the 30 passes. That's the one, the 30 guest permits, that's the one that causes the problem of, the first 30 you can sell them at half price.
Gaming the systems.
Yeah, that's automatic. Or, you can sell them at more than the $2 value that it has. So somehow we need to figure out a mechanism so that we can track it to that resident, to either again, I don't know, it will be difficult to put driver's license numbers, the plate numbers on those guest permits. It's something we need to think
And John,
about.
nothing stops you, once you sold the 30, to go get another 30.
Exactly. That could be working in City of Beverly Hills years ago.
It's a business now.
South of Wilshire Boulevard, it was a huge, business because, parking in Beverly is $150 a month, and you get the permit parking, first 200 blocks, 100 south and 200 south of Wilshire, and, people would actually sell them and have a monthly income off of it, unfortunately. So that can happen, hopefully not here as much, but it's something we need to think about.
Absolutely, and one of the challenges, no matter what, is to reduce the opportunity for a separate black market on permits, and it's a challenge with any of it. What we did identify is the 2 guest permits that are completely free of charge and are not tracked with a license plate to a vehicle are the best opportunity for abuse, and would obviously be more than the 30 days. So if you give them 30 days, and they were to abuse it for 30 days, they still have 11 more months in the year they've got to find a solution for. So this was trying to reduce the abuse to the best possible allowance. We still know there's going to be some people that get their free permits and give them, sell them, use them for other purposes.
Now, above 30, it's $2 a permit, right?
Correct.
So 10 permits is $20.
Yes, which would basically be a $2 daily rate for anybody who wished to use it.
Right, but parking at the meters is far more expensive, and you're limited.
Well, why don't, it sounds like maybe polish it up and bring it back to us one more time.
Okay, given that there seems to be a consensus that we're not quite ready for prime time, I'll withdraw my motion, and we can deal with this after it's been augmented.
I think Commissioners, you've raised very good points, and we know some of these problems. Sometimes you implement them, you try to address them as they come, or other times it's better to do it right in the first place and try to address them and clarify and make sure everybody understands it, especially if you're a resident, you want to know the requirements up front. So you can't sell, this is how many permits you get, you can only get 2 or 3, etc. I think with your comments, we can polish it and bring it back.
And the City Council may see fit to tweak it when it comes before them anyway.
That's correct.
Good. Next item, please.
Item 6 is Commission staff comments, updates.
Well, I think our big item is the departure of Mr. Bagdanian, the heartbeat of this commission.
And our council as well.
Are you as well? Oh my
Yes.
gosh, we are bereft. We are bereft.
Thank you. We're both retiring as of the end of this week.
So whatever we do in the parking thing is going to be a staff turnover, and that'll. But obviously, go
We'll
ahead.
have Bobby Aldesco will be sitting in for me after this week. So we'll keep him fully briefed on the issues, and Bobby will also work with Public Works staff. So you'll be in good hands.
Commissioner, members of the commission, same way I'm retiring and end of this month, and the Department of Public Works is going through some restructuring currently, and the traffic engineering operations and design and construction will go into the engineering division. They're being merged together. In the area of parking, we still are working on that. In the area of transit and operations, that's still being worked on. As it relates to the basically staffing and managing the Transportation and Parking Commission, That's a work in progress. I don't have an answer for you at this point, but that's going to be addressed in the upcoming months. But we still have staff that can, on a specific case-by-case basis, will address the commission, and the staffing, administrative staff will still be there to deal with the administrative functions of the commission. And on my behalf, I truly want to thank you all for being probably the greatest commission that I've worked with in the last 21 years because of the thoroughness and your analytical way of looking at things and being very practical. And you've really brought us, staff, a lot of good help in addressing transportation parking issues that sometimes we as staff, we don't see it, but you as a resident or a business person or transportation professional have raised very good questions and make us make the end product much better and go to council, which most of the time council has taken a lot of value in the commission's recommendations. So you've truly made our life easier. So I want to thank you all for doing a great job.
We always liked your even-handed flattery. But we're losing all your institutional memories, so we're having sort of
just in terms of quick updates, the bicycle transportation plan is going to council tomorrow night. So hopefully that will pass so that we can move on into the implementation phase of the bicycle plan. It's been in the works for a long time. We've tweaked it and done a lot of things. Part of that, we're also recommending to council a process for addressing the one component of the plan, which is the road diets. How do we, go forward with that? So as we proceed, we're going to be working with the Bicycle Advisory Committee. Certainly, two of the commissioners were part of that Bicycle Advisory Committee to maybe select in 2 or 3 bicycle candidate routes for road diets, and then evaluate those, work with the community, making sure they're all aware of it, they've been part of the decision-making before we do anything in terms of approval, bring it to the commission in terms of a recommendation to the commission that, from the top 8, let's say we selected 3, we've done the outreach, get your okay, go to council, and then let council make the final decision on which one to choose. Then we go through the process of actual implementation, before and after studies. This way, nobody can express a concern that we weren't part of it or the decision was made ahead of time, and so on and so forth. So it's going to take some time to move through that process because, once you alter the configuration of a street, it's difficult. Every city is going through that same process. So that's going to be coming to the commission in the future. And with that, that's all the updates I have.
comments from commissioners?
Your reception is Wednesday morning, correct? 9 to...
Tomorrow.
That's tomorrow, the 28th, that's tomorrow. Okay.
Hope I can find a parking spot.
There'll be plenty.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Bogdanian and Ms. Sansone. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with you since 2008 for me, and we're going to be sorry to see you go, and wish you the best of luck and happiness in whatever you decide to get into in the future. Hopefully it'll be something more, yet even more interesting and exciting than this. The only other item I wanted to mention is that last week I attended the Metro Citizens Advisory Council meeting, and just very briefly wanted to mention that we got a presentation on the hot lanes that will be coming to the I-110 and the I-10 freeways this fall. Hot lane is a high occupancy toll lane, and it's going to take effect on the Harbor Freeway south of downtown, between downtown and the 405, and on the 10 freeway east of downtown, between downtown and the 605. And there's the existing carpool lane or carpool lanes. There will actually be 2 express lanes on each freeway. Will be accessible only by people who have a fast-track transponder, which is a little white plastic box that you will keep in your vehicle. If you're a solo driver in the carpool lane, you will be charged a fee that will go up and down depending on the capacity of the lanes. And if you are a carpool, you can still drive in the lane for free. A carpool is 3 people on the 10 and 2 people on the 110. But you still will need to have the fast track transponder. And if anyone is interested in any of the technical details or about how that will work, please talk to me after the meeting. I don't want to get into it here, or we'll be here all night. And that's it for me.
And the transponders are free.
No, they are not.
It's like $7 a month.
You have to pay, I think it's an initial $40 fee to get into the program, and I think they charge you $3 a month for the transponder from that point after that.
Whether you use it or not, so the occasional ride to LAX, you have to pay $3 a
I
month.
just wanted to send a message.
There will
to
be no toll gates of any kind. It will all be handled with transponder and automated license plate scanners, which is what they will use to make sure that you are authorized to be in the fast track lane.
Let's do that for South Brand. No?
It's kind of expensive.
Come on,
and federal grant money is paying for the majority of it. And actually, the lion's share of the budget for the project has gone to transit to buy new buses to help provide more transit along both of those corridors.
It's also part of the 105, isn't it? At least the transition.
They will continue the fast track lane onto the 105 carpool lane, yeah.
So the 105 is included as well?
Not
Short of the
it-
405,
It won't be
not-
fast tracked,
Yeah.
but they will allow. If you don't have a fast track and you are a carpool and you're on the harbor and you want to transition to the 105, I think there'll be a place where you can get on that will allow you to do that without having to,
And conversely, going north, you better exit quickly.
I believe so, and there should be signage to that effect as well. But that's coming in the fall.
If there's nothing else, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.